Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, coming at you with another Swordsoul Tenyi deck profile, this time for Season 18. It's funny, when I did my last tier list video, ranking all the different decks, I put Swordsoul at tier 3, and I think it might have been because I made a comment of how Swordsoul is decidedly tier 3. I got more than one comment saying, like, Swordsoul is still a good deck, what are you talking about? Now, I said this in the actual tier list video, but I'll, reiterate here again. I think that every deck featured on that tier list is a good deck, and I think there are also good decks that I did not feature on that tier list. Tier 3 does not mean the deck is bad, in fact quite the opposite, as I think even lower rogue decks are still more than capable of seeing a lot of success on the ladder. So Swordsoul being a tier 3 deck is not at all an insult. Really, in a lot of ways, it's a testament to just how much this deck has been able to endure, despite the massive power creep we've been seeing in the game. This deck has been fine, not only like in current Yu-Gi-Oh, but also like before, even power creep when it was still a tier 1 deck. It was not oppressively so. The only hit the deck has really taken, I mean, aside from Halki Fibrax getting banned, which really didn't impact how Swordsoul Tenyi plays too much, was Longyuan to 2, which arguably this card could very easily go back up to 3 copies, and it would be still totally fine. So basically what I'm getting at is that this deck has been like consistently not only very strong, but very balanced in ways that a lot of decks now and in the past have not been. So Swordsoul Tenyi, I have nothing but respect for as a deck. I don't want anybody to think that I dislike this deck by any means. I very much like Swordsoul Tenyi. A lot of people were also suggesting playing more than one Protos, even up to 3. This is another thing that I generally agree with. I just honestly can't really be bothered to craft more than one copy. I know I have plenty of UR dust, but of course, as always ever, there are other decks in the future I'm interested in, and I generally just like saving dust in case I need it, is my philosophy. So, Swordsoul Tenyi, while it's a deck that I do really like, it's not a deck that I play often enough to want to craft like multiple Protos. But, and I've said this in the past as well, if I was going all in on Swordsoul Tenyi in a meta like this one where it's very tier limits heavy, then yes, absolutely, I would definitely go in on multiple copies of Protos. I would definitely test up to 3 even, because I do think the card is exceptionally powerful, and again, in this particular meta, you do want to see it pretty much all the time. I would definitely drop DD Crow's former Protos. DD Crow is fine in this meta, but it's not something I'm like super excited to play. Bizshields actually, when those come out, would not be bad additions at all. The level 6 body can definitely be relevant for synchroing. I think more so than DD Crow is. So it might even be as simple as, even if you don't want to play more Protos, just slotting out the 2 DD Crows for Magma Hut and Druistorm when those come out, which at the time of recording this is a few days away. The time this goes out is probably tomorrow. I think this is coming out the day before those cards actually drop in Master Duel. So not really too many changes at all with the Swordsoul Tenyi list between Season 17 and 18. Again, with the caveat that if I had more Protos, I would absolutely be playing them. The main deck has not changed whatsoever. The extra deck I made an extremely minor adjustment to that frankly won't come up in this video, but I do think is one worth noting still. We have taken out Shen altogether. We just don't have a level 9 body, and I am instead playing Crimson Blader. To be fair, even before I was playing Virtual World Shen when I was playing Xiao Fang, I couldn't tell you the last time I actually summoned it in this deck. It's probably been like less than 5 times total in like the almost year now of, actually over a year, what am I talking about? Over a year of playing Swordsoul now. It's probably 5 or less times that I've actually summoned a Xiao Fang in Swordsoul Tenyi, and that was even back when light was a more relevant attribute to the meta. Light effects are not particularly prevalent at this point in time, so yeah, ultimately decided just to slot in Crimson Blader. This card can be nice against tier limits and also branded. A lot of decks that are good right now and or will be good once the new support selection pack drops. It's a card I'm pretty optimistic about. It's pretty niche of when it's useful. Obviously, it's only really good going second because it has to destroy a monster by battle. And it's also only good in a situation where you're going second but you can't OTK. Then in that case, you can use Crimson Blader to basically ensure that your opponent won't have much of a turn and that you can get them on the crackback. So niche and situational for when it's useful, but the extra deck slot was fairly open anyway, so it's like, why not? Plus, even if I really wanted to play level 9 Synchro, I think I could drop one of the Monk of the Tenyis. Like, it's pretty pretty rare in this particular meta where the games get grindy enough that all 3 end up mattering. I think that 2 would be more than enough for this particular meta. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say about Sword Souls right now. Again, just because there's not really much new in my build, and it's not really much going on with the deck in general. I will say, I did consider adding the new level 10 Ice Jade Synchro, which I even do have a copy of, but ultimately decided that I did favor the third Monk of the Tenyi just slightly a little bit more. I think this card has a nice effect, but like that's the thing. It's like fine, but I can't really see a world where I would summon this over Baron, Xiaofeng, or Chengying, or the Qixing Longyuan. Like even this card, I barely ever summon. It's extremely rare that I find myself summoning this card, and that could just be me not playing Sword Soul correctly, but I can't see a world where I would want to summon this over one of my other level 10 synchros, and I would not drop one of these level 10 synchros to play the new Ice Jade. So that's my 2 cents on that card in this deck. But let's go ahead and break the list down card by card, and then we'll look at some gameplay. So this build is on 2 DD Crow, 2 Tenyi Spirirt Adhara, 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 1 Tenyi Spirirt Shthana, 3 Swordsoul of Mo Ye, 2 Swordsoul of Taia, 2 Incredible Ecclesia, the Virtuous, 2 Swordsoul Strategist Longyuan, 2 Tenyi Spirirt Vishuda, 3 Tenyi Spirirt Ashuna, 1 Archnemesis Protos, 3 Triple Tactics Talent, 3 Swordsoul Emergence, 2 Call by the Grave, 2 Heavenly Dragon Circle, 3 Infinite Impermanence, and then a Swordsoul Blackout. That's our main deck. For the extra, we're on Yazi, Evil of the Zing, Crimson Blader, 2 Baxia, Brightness of the Zing, 1 Draco Berserker of the Tenyi, 2 Swordsoul Grandmaster Chixiao, 1 Baronne de Fluer, 1 Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign Chengying, 1 Swordsoul Sinister Sovereign Qixing Longyuan, 1 Psychic and Punisher, 3 Monk of the Tenyi, and then our Shaman of the Tenyi. So there's our list. Now let's look at these games. So for our first duel, we're going to find ourselves up against Tearlaments. Been seeing admittedly a little bit less of them. Even the time these games are played, this is still, and of course I think the time this video is coming out too, this is still pre-ban list and pre-new selection pack, but definitely it seems like people are already kind of gearing up to test other things other than Tearlaments. But all the same, we are still seeing, of course, quite a bit of them on the ladder as well. Here we do get to go first. I'm going to start by throwing out the Adhara before summoning the Ecclesia, just to get the extra body on board. Better to have it not need it than need to not have it. Plus we have an extra Adhara in hand anyway. Then I'm going to do a pretty typical Mo Ye line, finding the Mo Ye off of the Ecclesia there. We managed to draw a Blackout, which is pretty nice, and of course we're going to grab the Longyuan as well. We'll send the other Adhara. Longyuan gets the biggest token. Now I get to make Baronne de Fluer. This is very, very standard Sword Soul stuff, and not particularly, like, exciting, but I think ultimately still a fine opening turn. Like, to have a couple of negates on board, as well as the face-down call by and Swordsoul Blackout, I think makes for a still, even in this particular meta, a decent turn 1 end board. So, opponent's going to start with their Tearlaments Heartbeat. I'm going to allow them to shuffle back the Swordsoul Blackout. It's totally fine because the Blackout is probably the least useful of these disruption tools against Tearlaments anyway. Interestingly enough, I find my opponent pitching Destrudo. I did look at their deck list, and they do actually have, as their level 7 synchro, the FA card. Is it Dawn Dragster, I think, that blows up spells and trap cards. But they are going to follow up with a Scream and Rhinoheart, definitely a little bit more impressive than just going for a level 7 Synchro. If we look at their mills, not too great. The Rhinoheart doesn't seem like they have a card to send with. They've got a Havness that they're going to send off Rhinoheart, but I'm going to go ahead and fire off the Call By on that. Opponent responds with Call By on a Adhara for some reason. That's 100% fine. I have absolutely zero plans to use Adhara's effect during this duel, so that is A-okay. And, of course, I'm absolutely fine sending the Havness, or banishing it, rather, not only to stop this fusing effect, but now, even if this last card in hand happens to be a Havness, which I already know it's not, because they didn't get a... Well, I'm assuming it's not because they didn't activate their Rhinoheart. We still get a chance to negate it there. And then, yeah, they bring back the Destrudo, and like I said, they're only level 7 Synchro option. I was wondering if they were going to bring out a Moonlight Black Rose, but of course, even if they did, I still have Chixiao and Baron, and they are not able to battle over it, and they are not able to set up anything meaningful into it, which means the duel is pretty much mine, and the opponent, realizing this, just concedes. So yeah, don't let anyone tell you that Swordsoul Tenyi is not currently capable of keeping up in this metagame. That is definitely far from the truth. And as you can see, don't even necessarily need Protos to do so. Even the old standby of, Baronne and Chixiao, even that is enough to, handle a lot of hands, even against the dreaded tier limits. But we still have plenty more games to look at. Let's go into the next one here. So now we're going to be playing up against Adhara. I was looking over the opponent's list, and the main deck, I think our extra decks are a little bit different, but funnily enough, their main deck is like literally card for card the exact one that I ended up building, which is going to be another deck profile will premiere in the relatively near future here. But for now, it's going to be the opponent's first turn. They summon Doki Doki, set a card, and then pass. So they seem particularly bricked up. The normal summoning Doki Doki is admittedly a little bit confusing here. I'm not really certain what my opponent's trying to do by summoning this. But it's totally fine, honestly. My opponent's going to draw phase Maxx. I am playing Talent, so that does end up being pretty good. But here I'm going to normal summon Ecclesia, battle over Doki Doki, go to main phase 2, and then just pass. Now, you might be thinking, well, Lex, you have the attack on this turn. It's turn 2. Don't you want to try to power through the Maxx and see if you can OTK? And with this hand in particular, it's not impossible by any means. In fact, I think it's very possible with this hand, but I don't know if it's 100% certain through the back row. If the back row is even something as simple as Infinite Impermanence, that could throw a wrench in my ability to OTK, and that Imper might not come up until a point in the turn where they've already drawn 2, 3, maybe even 4 cards, right? So I don't really want to give them that much advantage because they're so clearly bricked up, and this is the main motivation for me not pushing through Maxx here. That's something I've been asked before, is when do you decide to push through Maxx and when do you decide not to? On turn 2 in particular, if the opponent's hand feels super bricked up, which it absolutely does here, and it's not necessarily 100% certain that I can OTK, which again, just because of the back row, I'm a little bit dubious, I'm just going to leave them bricked up, and I'm just going to ultimately end up passing it back to them after just battling over the Doki Doki there. So opponent's going to set a monster, and then pass back to me, which definitely tells me that they're still 100% bricked up. I'm going to draw Ash Blossom. The opponent's got yet another draw phase Maxx. I'm going to fire off the Ash Blossom in response, but the opponent's got their face down monster, which is going to ultimately end up being called by the grave. So my plan here moving forward is actually going to be the same as my plan as has been so far. Although here I will say it might be a bit greedy to not OTK potentially. The other thing too is I know I'm up against Adhara at this point because of Doki Doki. And I also know that there's not a whole lot they can do if they're this bricked up and they're just in top deck mode. Adhara doesn't have, I mean, you could argue that oh, they could top deck a Researcher or a Seeker, just any of the tuners, and they could get an Excavate effect off. And while it's true I only really have DD Crow for disruption, even if they do manage to set up Block Dragon, I can still banish it with DD Crow. And ultimately I think that is going to be enough. Just again, they're so bricked up at this point. I have absolutely zero faith that my opponent's going to top deck anything meaningful. So once again, I'm not playing at all under their Maxx. I'm just going to go ahead and pass. They top deck for turn, and then ultimately end up conceding. So I often end up doing this again when I feel like my opponent does not have any live draws, and I do feel like that was the optimal play here, the optimal way to play. You could argue that it was a bit risky, as I said before, but ultimately I think acknowledging when your opponent is bricked up is the most important factor of whether or not you should press into a Maxx, particularly going second. And it can definitely help to know how decks operate in order to be able to assess that. Now, I think it was still pretty obvious, even if you've never played Adhara in this particular case, that my opponent was bricked, but having that knowledge still can definitely help of knowing what they can and can't top deck, and if they do top deck something, how likely that is to get them out of their situation. So we do still have a couple more games to take a look at. Let's go straight into the next one here. This one's going to be up against Cyber Dragons. I've not played against this deck in quite a bit of time, but it's not a deck that I'm particularly afraid of facing. Cyber Dragon Findy can potentially be annoying, but it's still not terrible to deal with. Going second yet again here, but we did open with both DD Crow and Ecclesia, so that should hopefully be enough for us to manage to have enough disruption and then plays on the follow-up. Opponent's going to start with a core that they got off Cyber Emergency here. When I saw Emergency, I initially thought Drytron, but no, it is actually Cybers. Going to link off their 2s, or rather their 2 and their 1, in order to go for a Sprite Elf here, which is a little bit odd to me. I don't know, maybe they were playing a Sprite package. I don't remember seeing one when I looked at their deck, though. adding a Galaxy Soldier and then activating Sprite Elf's effect. I'm going to use the DD Crow in response to my opponent's Sprite Elf effect here, just because I don't want them to get this Cyber Dragon Core on the field, even though they won't be able to use the effect. But I'm honestly not super sure where they would have gone from there, especially because they end up passing. I thought for sure that this Galaxy Soldier was going to end up coming into play, but I guess they just don't have another light monster in their hand. Maybe they could have linked into something that would have allowed them to get a light monster in hand, who knows. But at this point, my hand is all gas, and my opponent's got a Maxx. You'll note that this time, I'm actually going to end up playing through it. Now, the deciding factor here that made me play through it this time is that I don't necessarily know that my opponent's bricked up, because I did disrupt them specifically with DD Crow. They could still have another starter in their hand for their next turn, and I actually do know that they have Galaxy Soldier, so they have a lot of top decks. Not only potential cards from their deck that would be live, but any light monster that they top deck will make that Galaxy Soldier live. I also know that they will be able to bring back a monster Sprite Elf if I leave it this turn. So because they have a monster on the field, I know they can't imperm, and they don't have any face down back rows. The worst they could really do to me at this point is Ash Blossom at some point, but Swordsoul in general is not very susceptible to Ash Blossom as disruption. So that's going to be my main factor here in pressing through this Maxx. I really wanted to show the dichotomy of this last game and this one here, because in both instances we did get Maxx'd on our turn 2, on turn 2, our first turn I should say, but whether or not we press through them, again, is going to really be situationally dependent. I think that's what makes it difficult a lot of times when people ask me, like, when do I press through, like, questions like, when do I press through Maxx? Because, like, that doesn't have any one general answer, which I feel like some people are looking for one general answer. Here I'm going to allow this to resolve this Ash Blossom. I don't care at all if they negate the Mo Ye draw, that's 100% fine. Another reason that I wanted to press through Maxx with this hand is because this hand I knew had a very easy and direct line to Baronne, and I knew that between Baronne and also just the fact that my opponent can't imperm and is generally limited in what disruption they can use, I know I can press through any possible disruption my opponent could have, and pretty easily OTK through that end board. Whereas the other hands in that last duel, they did have routes to Baronne by searching a Longyuan, but there's no necessarily a guarantee, especially as I give my opponent more draws with Maxx and they could potentially find something like an Ash Blossom or some other form of disruption that I can find it, unlike I did with this hand where I just have the Longyuan and a million different things to discard with it. So that's like, I hope that kind of illustrates at least a little bit of the difference between when to play through Maxx on turn 2 and when not to. But we do still have one more duel to look at, so let's go straight into this last game here. And for our final duel, we're going to be finding ourselves squaring off against tier limits once again. Seems like a pretty standard build. I did only glance at it, but it does have Cyber Sign because, of course, we are still playing before the new ban list drops. So we're going to be going second here. We did open Maxx. I'm going to fire that during the draw phase as always as ever to make sure we play around at the triple tactics talent. But the opponent does reveal that they're on tier limits, and unfortunately, tier limits do have the ability to set up a very solid end board, even under Maxx, that of course being Kiklos and Soliak. The monster negation is especially rough when you're playing Swordsoul Tenyi, because obviously getting your Mo Ye or Taia negated is very detrimental a lot of the time. So opponent's got 2 back rows, and they're going to get off another Maxx, get another turn 2 Maxx. This is going to be another instance of us trying to play through it though, because I know that my opponent is able to combo off on relatively few resources because they're on tier limits and they already have a fair number of resources on their board. Even if I just try to wait through it and they don't have anything to add to this board state, I'm still going to have to play through this board state on my next turn. So I'm like, we're just going to go for it here. I will say that in general in this meta, I am going to be a lot more willing to play through Maxx because Nibiru is not nearly as much of a factor. In fact, you could even argue Nibiru doesn't really exist at all right now because of the prevalence of tier limits. So as you can see, we are able to use the Vishuda to bounce their Kiklos, but unfortunately they've got to have this and an Infinite Impermanence, which is going to be really rough. Same with this Woodora that they sent. This Woodora that they end up sending is really going to be their backbreaker. It's going to make it so we're not even really able to play Protos on this turn, which is definitely a shame. Were it not for that Woodora, like all other things that end up happening here aside, were it not for that Woodora, I think we would have ended up being in a lot better of a spot than we're ultimately going to find ourselves in. Now opponent's going to make a Kaleidahart. I do still have the triple tactics talent, but unfortunately I don't have a link monster that I can use with the Kaleidahart here. The Monk of the Tenyi has to use that on like Tenyi, and the Shaman needs 2 worm monsters. It's not like a worm monster and then other monsters. It's 2 worm monsters. So I'm going to try to use the triple tack in order to draw 2 and see if I can find anything here. We did have a couple of outs, but unfortunately we just ultimately did not end up finding any. But notably a Longyuan would have been very, very useful here, and might have even been enough to save us. But, yeah. It's just because, like I said, that Mudora was like the linchpin, honestly. Were it not for that, we could have summoned Protos. We could have sent the Kaleidahart. Our opponent wouldn't be able to summon Darks, and it would have been much more difficult for them to try to come back. They still could have gone into a rank 4, like, Zeus line, but we would have had follow-up with a Mo Ye potentially here as well. Yeah, I can understand why people feel like Tier Limit is such a luck-based matchup, because it can sometimes come down to they just happen to mill the right card to out you, but you know, we gotta figure this is pre-banless. They have so many different shufflers they can mill. They have 5 total, right? And even beyond shufflers, like, they just have so many different outs in general. It could have been a Fairy Tale Snow that they milled. It could have been a Scream to search for the crime. It could have been, like, any number of things. So I think a lot of people think that, like, tier limits end up really screwing you over due to the luck of what they happen to mill. And that's like the perception, because, you know, what they happen to have milled is what was able to counter you. But really what it comes down to is that in most instances, they have enough things to mill, but they have enough variety of things to counter you that they're just so likely to do it. So once my opponent represents enough damage to push through my board and lethal, I'm just going to go ahead and give them the win here. So that's going to go ahead and do it for these games. Hopefully you all enjoyed them. Let's just go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.